Rachel, welcome. Thank you for joining us today for our transition talk. My name is Miriam Glaise. I'm the founder of Athletesoul, a two-time Olympian in synchronized swimming. And I'm joined today with Rachael Flatt, who was a figure skater. And she will be talking with us about her experience of athletic retirement and how she handled it. First, Rachel, can you give us a short overview of your sporting career?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about retirement today. So I actually started skating when I was 4, but won my first national championship at the novice level when I was 12. And from there, started competing internationally. I won junior world championships back in 2008. And I went on to be a 3-time national silver medalist. I won nationals back in 2010, which was when I qualified for the Olympics, and I finished 7th there. And went to Worlds a few times. I think my top finish was 5th, and dealt with some injuries the last couple of years of my career. And then my last event was at the 2014 US Championships in Boston. So that's a quick summary of my skating career.
Well, a pretty full career, lots of different competitions. When did you actually retire? When was the end of your career?
Yeah, so it was right after my last event in Boston. I knew at that point, heading into that season, that was going to be my last. It was an Olympic season, and I was hoping, I knew it was a long shot, but I was hoping I could maybe get onto another Olympic team. But like I said, I had dealt with a lot of injuries. I was in college at the time, and I was really focused on that and wasn't training nearly as much as I had wanted to, but I was finally listening to my body and what I could actually do, what my body could actually handle. I knew going into that event that was going to be my last, and it was very bittersweet. And but we had a good celebration afterwards. We had a big party in the hotel, and had like I think it's Mike's Pastry, which is a really famous pastry shop in Boston. And my dad went to school in the Boston area, and so he's like, okay, I'll go grab some. I'll get some champagne, and it was just like everyone coming in after the events, and we just had this big celebration in the lobby. It was really fun.
Wow, and it seems that you were lucky enough to actually choose when to retire in your own term. This was, it seems, a well thought out decision, right?
Yeah, there were many points in my career where I was not sure I was going to be able to retire on my own terms, because I had been injured pretty much continuously for almost 4 years after I went to the Olympics. I have a couple herniated discs in my back. I had a stress fracture. I had really horrible tendonitis in both ankles, to like the point where I could hardly walk at times. And I was pretty uncertain about my future in skating as a result of a number of those injuries. And so I actually, the season prior to my last season, I took 6 months off from skating altogether. And I thought, okay, this is it. I'm probably done. And I got back on the ice to train for a couple shows. And I was like, man, I really miss this. What if I just give this one more shot? I really want to go out on my own terms and feel like I'm finishing my career in a mentally healthy space. So I gave it a go, and fortunately it worked out that way. I actually didn't get injured that year, but I was also training a lot less. I was only training an hour or 2 a day, doing a lot of off ice training to supplement my on ice work. But I just really, my body physically could not handle it anymore. And like I said, I was really busy with school, and I wanted to focus on that. And so I was definitely one of the lucky ones, and very fortunate to be able to finish my career and feel really happy about the way that it ended.
This is absolutely fantastic, because you actually ended on a really high note, and a great competition. Mm-hmm. Not just going through the small door at a moment that wasn't chosen. It's really exciting to hear this kind of story, because they're so rare, especially mm-hmm. if you've dealt with a lot of injuries. How old were you when you retired, and how long had you been going at the highest level at that point?
Yeah, so I had my retirement at 21. I actually had a retirement party at 21, which I think is hilarious. Yeah, so I had been, competing at a really high level I had been competing internationally for over a decade. I had been competing in skating for, almost 18 years at that point. And I, you know, I think back to some of those moments, and I did not have the performances that I really wanted. Like my last two performances at nationals were not great. I had mistakes. I was really known in my career for being rock solid. Like the nickname that I had was like the rock or reliable Rachael, because I very, very rarely messed up. And so between my two programs, I think I had like three pretty major mistakes that were very visible. And so I think I had gotten to a point in my career and then just like my overall approach to skating that I was really just there to enjoy the experience and just have fun, like competing again and really doing it for myself. And even though they weren't the performances that I wanted, and I was really disappointed after the short program, by the end of the long program, I was like, wow, I've accomplished so much in my career, and now I've gotten to a point where I can step away from these totally imperfect performances and feel really good about that, because I'm doing this finally for myself for the first time in a really long time. So yeah, it was very bittersweet. I like hadn't announced publicly that I was retiring at that point. And I just remember this moment where I got off the ice, or I was about to get off the ice. My coach turned me around and he's like, okay, you need to take this in and remember this, because this is the last time that you're going to experience this. And so I like waved one more time to the audience, kind of like as a goodbye. And, of course, like immediately burst into tears because it was just so overwhelming with emotion. But yeah, it was very special. And I'm very grateful that he was there, especially to just be present with me in that moment and really understood the gravity of that point.
Yeah, super positive experience and really exciting to hear your ability to switch your mindset and look at your last performance as, yes, I actually enjoyed myself. I had a great time. I took it all in. And even though I made some mistake, this is still a great achievement. Really nice that you've been able to view it from that point. I really like that. Mm-hmm. So then you retired. You chose to retire. You go on with your first few weeks, months without training or competing. What were your biggest challenges as you move forward?
Yeah, so I was a junior in college at that point, and I was actually junior class president at Stanford, and I was very involved in student government and my classes. I was a pre-med student at the time, and so I was very focused on that. I was involved in a bunch of other stuff on campus and just went completely, like I threw myself into that work, and I didn't really realize that at the time. That was a way for me to kind of put off actually coping with retirement. And so it didn't really hit me until after I graduated. And it was, a year later in 2015 in June. And I decided that I was no longer going to go to medical school. I had submitted my first round of applications and I was like, this is not for me. And I was finally coming to terms with the fact that I wasn't skating anymore and like wasn't competing. And I had these two huge voids in my life and felt completely lost. I was really struggling with my identity. And yeah, I was not in a good place at that point. But I think on paper, if you were to look at where I was, I had this illustrious skating career. I just graduated from a great college. I was pre-med at that point in time. I was applying to medical schools. And I just was like, what do I do? Who am I? I have no idea what's going on. And I just felt miserable. So that was really when it hit me.
This is textbook athletic retirement, right? Yeah. Everything's perfect on paper. You had a great career. Everything's positive. You achieved what you wanted. You retired when you wanted. Mm-hmm. You went to a great university. I mean, the world is yours, and yet it's hard to figure out when that structure is gone, what happens next. So, yeah. you talked about your emotional challenges, and we'll get a little bit deeper into those, but was there also some challenges from a physical perspective? You obviously trained a lot of hours, and skating is intense from that perspective because it started really early on in your life and for many hours a day. So how did you handle the physical side?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So when I was training at my peak, I was usually involved in, so I was training like somewhere between 3 to 4 hours on the ice and then additional like 3 to 4 hours off ice. And, balancing that on top of school was, it's essentially a full-time job outside of, my academics. And so that was a really stark transition. My last year when I was competing, like I said, I was doing a lot less training on the ice. I was still having to do a lot of physical therapy because of my injuries over the years and, still doing some good crafts training and things like that. But I was probably on the whole training between like 4 to 5 hours a day. And so when I quit skating, I was like, wow, I have all the time in the world. What do I do? And that initial reaction was great. And then I very quickly filled it in with other things. But physically, I just felt like I actually had so much more energy. I really struggled though with trying to figure out what to do in the gym and how to work out and how to stay physically active. And honestly, I still feel like I'm still trying to figure that out to some extent because I feel like when I go to the gym, I'm like, I have to kill myself. Like I have to work out super hard. Like I'm working towards these goals, doing, uh, you know, the type of Olympic lifting that I used to do where you're doing like cleans and jerks and snatches and all that good stuff. And I really enjoyed going to the gym and working out like that. And also now I'm trying to do this just for my health and wellness. I'm not trying to be the best at the gym, although sometimes that competitiveness still comes out a little bit, but but yeah, I mean, that piece was really difficult. I think when I look back over the first couple of years, I was really trying to figure out the balance of like how often do I work out? Like I have to do what feels good for my body, something that isn't going to re-aggravate the injuries that I have. I have to be really cognizant of my back injuries because herniated discs never really go away. And so I can't really do a whole lot of yoga. Generally, that tends kind of makes it not feel good for the most part. But yeah, I don't know. There's that balance is still something that I'm trying to figure out a little bit, but I'm getting there. I mean, we go out hiking, we go out camping a lot of the time. In COVID times, I'm doing a lot of workouts from home in my living room. But yeah, I think just trying to listen to my body and what genuinely feels good and pushing myself a little bit, but not to the point where my body breaks anymore is there's a fine line.
I was going to touch on your injuries because you mentioned these injuries building up as you were getting closer to retiring from your sport. Is there a specific routine or workout that you have put together to maintain sort of equilibrium for your body, for your energy, for your injuries, so that just for your long-term health?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't have a specific routine. I've found now that I actually enjoy having a lot more spontaneity to like what I'm cooking, to what I'm doing to work out, because there was so much rigidity when I was training. Now I've really come to embrace a lot more spontaneity and uncertainty. And so, most of the time when I'm working out, I mean, we have a husky, so I have to take him out for walks a lot of the day. We go out hiking a ton and camping a lot. I do like virtual workouts when I'm procrastinating working on research papers. So I do things like that. Yeah, I feel like I'm still trying to get into other sports that I, have wanted to try. Like I used to really love rock climbing. And, again, like with my back injuries, I feel like, and with COVID, I've been a little hesitant to go in at least to a climbing gym and try that out, but that's definitely on my docket.
Perfect. I can relate to this. My hands are totally full of calluses from the climbing. So I encourage you to do to the indoor gym. It's awesome.
Yeah, I'm super excited.
Rachel, so you talked about that period post college. You're pre-med, you were a pre-med student, you had applied for med school, and then you realized that is not necessarily what I want to do. So what happened next? How did you get out of that situation where you were kind of lost and not knowing what was the next step?
Yeah, so when I graduated from college, the original plan was to take the year off and apply for med schools, just coach, do some seminars, and then go to medical school the next year. And that plan kind of blew up within, I don't know, maybe 6 weeks. And I had known though for a while that I did not want to pursue medical school. Like I had some suspicions around that for at least 6 months, but I wasn't really able to come to terms with that until I was ready. And so I had a good long chat with my parents about it. I had a good long, well, many cries. I just, I was really scared because I felt like I had all of these pressures and expectations to continue excelling outside of my academic and athletic careers. And I had this thought just replaying in my head, like, oh my gosh, did you just peak at 17 when you went to the Olympics? Or like, did you just peak graduating from college? Like, was that it? Is this all you're going to do in your life that's meaningful? And that thought just like petrified me, and I think really brought me down into a pretty low space mentally. And so for 6 months, I was just coaching and just trying to figure out what I wanted to do, but I wasn't even actively looking. I was just kind of talking to people on the side, seeing if there were other things that I was interested in. I knew I really enjoyed helping people and working with people, but I just didn't know the context in which I could be the most useful and be the most helpful. And so I think I was really looking for something to just ignite that same fire that skating lit, and would push me to challenge myself and help me accept like different aspects of my life. So yeah, I think for 6 months I was really in a hole, and I was not happy. I was really upset a lot of the time. I remember some days like going into coach, and I was just, this was like at 5:30 in the morning, because skating hours are very early, and I would just be like bawling on the way to the rink. And like some mornings, this one morning stands out to me in particular. Like I had gotten to the rink and I was only there for maybe an hour or two of lessons, and I just could not get out of the car. Like I was just crying, and one of the moms came over, and she was just like, hey, you need to go home. Like you need to go take some time for yourself, like go take a mental health day. And that was one of the first times that I had really heard that. And I was like, yeah, you're right. I'm not mentally here for this today. Like I don't know what's happening. And I was really scared to admit the fact that I just didn't know my core identities, and I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life at that point. So I'm very grateful for her to have said that to me in that moment, and to be really supportive of me. But yeah, it was rough.
Do you think that the fact that you were coaching, skating, having to go back, you were not part of that world anymore? You had chosen to step away, and you have consciously chosen to go a different path and embark on this career or journey that was unknown, but being somewhat back at the ring early in the morning with the structure of the training. Do you think that this had an impact on bringing all these emotions to the surface and just forced you to like face it?
100%. I actually think being at the rink for me and coaching at that point in time was probably one of the worst things that I could have done for myself, because I physically and mentally just needed a break from the sport. I needed to figure out my identity outside of skating, and I needed to try other hobbies, try other things, meet new people, and get other life experiences that would challenge me and engage me in ways that I hadn't been before. So I think being at the rink was actually not the best thing for me at that point in time, but it was the, plan that I had kind of built for myself just for that first year. And so I felt like I needed to kind of stick with that. And that was really the only thing giving me any structure, giving me a schedule, and it was some income at the same time too. So, I really, really did enjoy working with some of the students that I worked with. Fortunately, they were all fantastic and really supportive and like just fun kids to work with. But it was also just a constant reminder of like the huge loss that I had just experienced and was like still experiencing. And I was just going through these like stages of grief while having this like constant daily reminder. So yeah, I didn't realize that so much while I was kind of moving through that process. It took me a couple of years to realize, oh, maybe that wasn't the best thing for me at that point, because I did need some separation.
You could also look at it in the sense that this accelerated the process. Perhaps if you had stepped completely away from skating, this would have come back maybe later on. So maybe this was a way to just process much faster, be faced with it, and having to go, okay, this is really over and I have to, step on the other side of the wall. Did you receive any outside support as you were going through that difficult time? Any counseling or support from friends and family, former coaches?
Yeah, so I did not actually seek any mental health treatment or counseling at that point, which is ironic now that that's the avenue that I've pursued. But at the time, I don't think I was willing to admit to myself that I was really struggling that much. I just thought like, oh, this is the process that everyone goes through when they retire, and this is the process that, it was kind of two sides to the same coin. Like I thought, well, maybe everyone goes through this, and I should just be able to get through it, or like, no one else is talking about it. I'm struggling so much. And I'm ashamed of that fact. It was kind of those two lines of thinking that I was dealing with. So at that point, I was actually really scared to talk to anyone. And so I was really only confiding in my boyfriend at the time, my now husband, and he was just a rock. Like he had no career in high level sports. Like he played hockey growing up, and did well on his high school golf team, but really didn't pursue sports at a high level. So he really didn't understand like what I was going through. But he was just central to like being there every night when I was just really upset, and challenging me to try some new things and talk to new people, and just very, very supportive of that time, even though he didn't really quite understand it. And even now, like even it was a couple months ago, I was talking about like how poorly I was actually doing at that point in time. And he's like, gosh, I knew it was rough, but I didn't know it was that rough. And I just said, yeah, I was really, really scared to tell you, because we were early on in our relationship and I didn't want to like burden him with everything. And, I certainly talked to a couple of skating friends, but I was, again, very, very hesitant to let them know that I was actually having a tough time. I felt like I needed to put this facade up. And same thing with a lot of my school friends. I kind of talked with my parents about it, and they were also very, very supportive, because they knew I was dealing with the transition out of skating and the transition of not going to medical school. So those were like, that was kind of my core group, was Eric and my parents. And I was very, very fortunate that they were super supportive. But yeah, I really kept it pretty close to the chest for a while.
I think that's a common reaction and sentiment from a lot of athletes. You talked about being scared, the fears of the unknown, but also the embarrassment of struggling. and not willing, not being, not wanting to share that struggle, because we generally don't do that when we're athletes. So I think it's pretty common, all this reaction. And coming from figure skating, which, like synchronized swimming, is a pretty tough community with a lot of issues with unhealthy behaviors regarding foods or body image. Were those anything that you dealt with during your career and transitioning? How did you feel about your body post-sport? Is that something that was challenging for you?
Yeah, I definitely teetered on some unhealthy behaviors when I was competing. I mean, I definitely had really poor body image when I was training, really for the majority of my career, probably starting at like age 13, 14, when I started getting pretty nasty comments from people. And it didn't help that I did not physically like fit the mold for an elite skater at the time. Kind of the general physique, the quote unquote ideal physique, which is not really the case, but the perceived ideal physique is someone who's, very thin, very svelte, very toned. And I just kind of looked like your average kid next door. Like I was really strong and really healthy. But just my, genetic makeup doesn't, I don't think I'm ever going to look that way, no matter how hard I try. So, a lot of the body image concerns were rooted in that. And that definitely trickled over to when I retired. I lost a lot of muscle mass pretty quickly, which I was surprised about. And so I actually got to the thinnest I had been really since my elite career, without trying. And I even then I was still really overly critical of how I looked and comparing myself to other actively competing skaters, to people at school. And, there was just a lot of comparison there, and a lot of the same like thinking styles that I had for many years that just hadn't stopped. And then of course, as I retired, as I wasn't working out as much anymore and was like eating a wider diet and, having dessert and like indulging in things that I had wanted to try all those years, I was never really nothing was really ever completely off limits when I was training, but like, it was much smaller portions sometimes. And so, I was enjoying life and it was great. And, as my body was changing a little bit, I got really worried and, some clothes didn't fit quite the same way. And yeah, it was not a fun experience to go through. And I think a lot of athletes experience that quite a bit. I mean, there's like this common experience, especially for women in skating, where you have a very petite frame for many years, and oftentimes a lot of women retire in their like late teens, early 20s with almost like still a prepubescent body, and then their body finally goes through puberty right after they retire, so their body changes a lot. And I think that was almost something that I kind of went through a little bit as well. So it was just shocking sometimes, but I've really come to like embrace who I am and embrace like my body at this point. And, not every day is perfect. I don't love my body all the time, but I've certainly come a long way. And I really enjoy cooking. I love eating food that I've cooked and I can share with people. And yeah, so I've certainly come a long way, but it's not easy to make that transition from a really aesthetically based sport into real life, where you realize, well, not a lot of people actually care what you look like anymore. Like they just care who you are as a person. If you're kind, like if you're thoughtful, those are the things that a lot of people value. So
it was a lot of different transitions going at once for you in that 1 year after college, between the body changes, the college graduation, the end of your career, figuring out what you wanted to do next. Lots of stuff happening at once. So no wonder you had some really low time and difficult moment. So you went into it on a different path, kind of still related a little bit to medicine and the medical field. And so can you tell us, how did you find out what you're doing and how did you find that?
Yeah, so I had done a little bit of research my senior year. I volunteered as a research assistant on a really small study that was geared towards kids in kind of in at-risk locations in San Francisco, and just helping them build like healthier eating, sleeping habits, physical activity habits, just really building kind of foundational skills for later on in their life to prevent overweight and higher weight statuses. So that was something that I got involved with my senior year. Took a break from that, and then kind of out of the blue, got a call from my advisor. This was about a year into my official, I deem it like my official retirement, but it was the year, after I graduated, when I was kind of dealing with all this stuff. And I got a call from her, and she was like, hey, we're looking for someone to come in work part-time. And I was like, I will do it. Like, I need something else outside of skating right now. Like, I will jump at the chance to do something that I, genuinely had a good time doing. So yeah, so I jumped in on that, and then that eventually turned into a full-time research position, focusing on eating disorders and digital mental health tools. And so I got really involved in and then became kind of the primary research coordinator for a pretty substantial study that was being implemented at like 28 colleges nationally, and it was just a digital eating disorder intervention. So I realized once I got my hands into that research project, I was like, oh my gosh, this is the kind of project, these are the types of resources and support that athletes really need, and there's not anything that's out there like this. I need to do this. Like, this is where I can see myself really helping others. And so I jumped into applying to clinical psychology PhD programs, got into a couple of schools, and decided to pursue my PhD under Dr. Cindy Bulick at UNC Chapel Hill. So I'm now based out of North Carolina, and I'm getting my doctorate in clinical psychology. And so I'm still very passionate about eating disorders in athletes and doing research and clinical work. I'm still very passionate about digital mental health tools. But kind of the overarching umbrella at this point is just athlete mental health, and making sure that they have access to resources, making sure that they feel supported, making sure that they're getting high quality evidence-based treatments. And so that's a lot of what I'm doing at this point. And I'm absolutely in love with the field. I'm really enjoying myself, and of course I'm working my tail off in grad school. I've had a lot of sleepless nights, but it feels like work that I'm genuinely proud to do.
And we can feel your enthusiasm and your passion for it, and it's really exciting because we definitely need a lot of psychologists, sports psychologists, clinical psychologists, social worker, you name it, who are former athletes and are going into this field. It's really needed. And you've been super involved, not just from your academics, but also, I believe, with athlete representation and speaking up for mental health for athletes. Is this inspiration coming from your personal journey, from that experience with that company and that experience post undergrad? Where is it coming from? Is it at the intersection of all of this?
Yeah, I think it's a culmination of like my life experiences and the areas where I feel like I can contribute the most. But most importantly, it comes from a place of like, I just want others to have a different kind of experience. I want athletes who are coming up through the sport now to feel like they have the types of support that they need, that they have the types of resources and the people in their corners that will vouch for them, will support them kind of in this capacity. I want to make sure that these are truly safe spaces, and that like culturally we are shifting how we think about sports and athletes, and like actually prioritizing them as people first, and like their health and well-being first, rather than just medal counts. I think the mental health and wellness standpoint is something that has not been addressed nearly enough. And even though the the culture is kind of changing around that. Especially, I mean, and, you know, especially with like someone like Simone Biles having stepped forward at the most recent games and saying, hey, you know, mentally I'm not in a place where I can compete right now. Like no one has really ever done that on kind of on a stage like that. And so to see folks like her, to see like, you know, Phelps and even in Lindsey Vonn's documentary that she did that was released, I think earlier this year, you know, there's, and the documentary of Weight of Gold, like all of these kind of major milestones are showing that the conversation is moving forward. And yet we still have so much more work to do. Like I would love to see sports get to a point where, you know, if an athlete has any sort of mental health concern, there is immediately like protocols in place. They are able to see folks if they need treatment, if they need support, you know, they're able to get access to the things that they need. And on a societal level, it would be great to see that too. So yeah, I feel very passionately about this area, and I hope that, you know, when we speak out about this and have more conversations like this, that more people feel like they can share their experiences, that they can go seek help if they need it. But yeah, at the end of the day, this is I'm in it for the long haul. You know, this is going to be a long time to make these changes. But I'm just genuinely really excited to be able to contribute in any way, really.
Absolutely. And you have already contributed, you know, as an athlete rep in speaking up about this, getting trained to be in that field is already a big step. I also feel that we need the athlete and the coaches community to accept this topic too. So it cannot be coming just from what I call the outside network, the outside support network, you know, the provider in nutrition, in psychology, the trainers. Like it cannot be just peripheral. It has to be also the athletes themselves agreeing and accepting that, you know, you can be vulnerable and there are times to do that and times to be stronger, and you are boss. You could also be boss at the same time. And for the coaches too, to be educated in that space. So there's so many different elements, and you're right, it's gonna take quite a lot of time, but I'm like you, very excited to see the changes and the conversation shifting, and I cannot wait to see where it goes, because I think that the performances are going to be so much stronger when you lift that weight off the athlete's shoulder and they know that you've got their back regardless of what happens on the field. I think that's super exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with you. And, you know, to your point, like when I think about the culture within sports, I don't think of it just being the athletes. Like it is the athletes and the entire support system, all of the folks who work with them. You know, it's going to be a team effort, which means that we have to get every person on board with these types of ideas to really genuinely support not just the athlete's physical health, but their mental health too, because that is a critical component to their overall well-being, to their performance, and most importantly, like to who they are as people. And I think as we talk about retirement, you know, the better place mentally that athletes are during their careers, I think it'll actually help make that transition a little bit easier. When they're able to kind of identify other things about themselves that they really like, they, you know, have an identity that's tied to other things outside of just their athletic accomplishments, like being able to kind of build out yourself as a person, and having coaches, having, you know, dietitians, physical therapists, athletic trainers, like having all of those support systems advocating for that type of work. I mean, that's going to change how a lot of people approach sports and how athletes feel as they move through the sport and after they retire.
Absolutely. And developing the whole athlete, the whole person, both on and off the field, it helps for athletic retirement. It also helps you just enjoying your career more as an athlete. It might make your career longer. You might be able to perform for a longer period of time. You might be able to handle your injuries differently as well. So I see only benefit for it. Now that you've trained as a as a psychologist and you've learned more about psychology, do you look at your career differently? Do you look at your sporting career differently or from a different perspective with more knowledge?
Oh, totally. I think back to like when I was a teenager a lot of the time and thinking about some of the experiences that I had, the things that I did and like the people that I engaged with and, the communication that I had with other people. Like there's so many things that I look back and I'm like, wow, I wish I had, you know, experienced like or had been able to go to therapy and not just like sports psychology. I wish that I had some of the knowledge that I have now. But of course, I wouldn't be here in this position had I not gone through all of that. So, it's kind of a conundrum there, but I really do believe that, my what I'm doing now, the research that I'm doing, the clinical work that I'm doing, the experiences that I've had leading up to this point, and those will certainly inform like the future work that I'm doing, but it's also kind of fun to reflect on my career and just think, wow, I did not realize that that's what was happening at that point in time. But it's fun to reflect on that, but it's also a really good way for me to learn, understand more, and grow as a person.
And when you look back at your career, is there any regrets or anything that you still think today, oh, I wish I had done this, or I wish I had done this differently?
I mean, like I said, if I had done anything differently, I wouldn't be in this position. And at the same time, I think if there was one thing that I had maybe done differently, I think it would have been just to speak up for myself a little bit more. I am very much a people pleaser and I really want to do the right thing all the time, even if it's not the best thing for myself personally. So I believe that if I had been able to speak up for myself a little bit more sometimes, or just push back, or even just respond to people who are like making really terrible comments about my body and be like, hey, that's not appropriate, like don't say that, thank you very much, I appreciate that you're trying to help, but like not the way to say that. Or just some things like that. I think that would have helped me assert myself as a person a little bit more and feel a little bit more confident. But yeah, I mean, at the same time, if I hadn't made the same decisions that I did then, I wouldn't be where I am now. So I'm very grateful for those experiences. And like, yes, it hurt a lot sometimes. But I think that makes me even more passionate about being a really strong advocate for these types of issues, for really fighting for others to make sure that that's not their experience, and making sure that we're creating a really safe space that allows people to just genuinely thrive.
And I was going to say exactly that. You're actually now being that advocate that you perhaps were not able to be earlier on. And really it comes with maturity, this ability to speak up for yourself and find your voice. And clearly you not only have found it, but now you're able to do it even stronger and better for others. So that's really exciting.
Thanks, I'm trying.
Well, I've heard lots of good things about the work that you've been doing, so I'm sure you're doing that well. Do you have any recommendation for athletes who are thinking about the end of their career, or perhaps are at the end of their career, or maybe in a place where they're struggling because they've passed that stage and they're going through their moment of low? As we all go through the grieving process, there is a time where you kind of feel stuck. You don't really know what's forward, but you also know you can go backwards. So any recommendation for someone who is in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, first off, if for the folks who are struggling, like reach out for help. It doesn't necessarily have to be a therapist if you're a little bit worried about that. At the very least, just talk with someone, whether it's a friend, a family member, but someone who is going to be supportive. And if you don't feel like you have that, there are so many resources online. There's a lot of great providers out there who are ready and willing to jump in and just help support you as a person and can be, someone to really help you navigate that process, navigate whatever's going on. And if you are, struggling with retirement, just thinking about a game plan, thinking about how to navigate the grief and the loss, or the frustration, or the even excitement that you feel about leaving the sport. So, first and foremost, like go seek a little bit of help. But I think for folks who are kind of at the precipice of retirement, or currently figuring out their retirement game plan, I think the most important thing that I would recommend is just spend some time thinking about who you are as a person outside of sport. Like, what are the things you value? What are the things that you enjoy doing? Who are the types of people that you enjoy being around? Like, those are just some very simple questions that you can start thinking about. But I think preparing for that shift out of sport requires some thought and just a little bit of preparation. It doesn't have to be a lot, but just a little bit to kind of get that momentum going. I know a lot of athletes feel like they can't even think about retirement until they're actually done, because their entire focus has to be on their sport, or the upcoming competition. And I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think you can carve out a few minutes of your week to just spend a little bit of time on that, to help address some of that uncertainty, and just to help make that transition a little bit easier. So there are certainly a lot of athletes who have retired before you and are ready and willing to chat and to be supportive. I'm certainly one of those people, so I'm always happy to chat about this. And I think this is just like a very uniting experience for a lot of athletes who have since moved on from sport. And whether or not you decide to stay in it as a coach or support staff, or coming back in a provider standpoint, there's a lot of different ways to kind of stay involved with sport. Or if you decide, nope, I'm totally done with it, all of those avenues are great to pursue. But there's a lot out in the world outside of sport that you can enjoy and really thrive in. So yeah, I think those are probably my two sentiments.
Super. And you're right. There's plenty of space to thrive after your sport career. It's not over. It can be as exciting as it was. And there's a lot of hope, even if you're feeling like you're in a moment of low in your transition. It's not going to stay like that. Rachael, thank you so much for your time, your insight, your enthusiasm about psychology and helping athletes and being an advocate for athletes. It's really exciting to see the work that you're doing, the path that you're taking. We cannot encourage enough athletes to go on that path as well. And yeah, I appreciate you taking the time in supporting athletes in our cause. Thank you.
You bet. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, Rachael.